Welcome, everybody, to The Horizontal. This is Season 1, Episode 3. I am your host, once again, Mike Judici. And on the table, once again, is Judici League 11. Last season, this season, so on, so forth, fantasy football, and whatever we want to talk about. And today's guest, I have another owner. This is his second year, going to be his second year in the league, Bryan P. Smith. Welcome.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Absolutely. And let's recall that you went 6-8 your first season, inaugural season in this league. You were tied with me. I had the most points, so I got fifth place. Got 6th.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you got sixth place. And want an opening thought about the last season?
It was definitely a lot more competitive. I started out in 2015. I believe it was your second league that you were doing that year. It was like almost like the minor leagues for Judici's league. I mean, there were some people who it was me, Josh, Teach, you. I think Tony may have been in that league, but I'm not positive. So some of the similar players, familiar names who've been involved in Judici's league, but definitely a lot of a bit of a learning curve, I'd say, going into last year's league from sort of the less competitive nature of the minor league kind of league to the big Judici's league. Definitely a lot more thought and skill with those players as opposed to the year before.
Yeah, definitely. There's just a lot more at stake in this league.
Mm-hmm.
The other one was free
Mm-hmm.
and kind of just on ESPN, just an impulse thing.
Yep, definitely.
This one's always been planned out, and you can definitely tell how competitive this league is. And since you took over, we did the lottery all over again because we had 4 new teams that last year.
Mm-hmm.
And you happen to be the lucky winner, number 1.
Mm.
And as I think it's been mentioned before in previous podcasts, number 1 was Rob Gronkowski, and I think the people have been waiting to hear this explanation. I would love to hear it.
Well, I have been waiting to defend this pick for a very long time. It's I think people were kind of shocked that I took Gronk number 1 overall. Now, I didn't do this because I'm a Patriots fan, which I am. I did not do it out of bias. Some of it was strategy based. So let me go into how I had my team the year before in fantasy. And I kind of used that as a building block for this year. So in the year before in fantasy, I had an amazing wide receiver core of Amari Cooper, DeAndre Hopkins, and Eric Decker. And at my tight end position, I had Gronk. And at my flex, I picked up Jordan Reed. So I was just scoring crazy points all season. I had like scrubs at quarterback, kind of like just put guys in and out. I had very little running game. So my first instinct was, I know the tight ends in fantasy tend to not necessarily be the highest priority, but I figured, I mean, with the tight end position, it's Gronk and then there's everyone else. Gronk is not just a tight end, he's just an athletic freak. And my thought was that, knowing that this is a New England-based league, I picked first overall, and I wasn't picking again until the last pick of the second round.
16th, yep.
So my thought process behind this was that if I'm looking to kind of use that strategy again, Gronk's not going to make it. And I do have the numbers pulled up as to why I made that decision, which was that in 2015, Gronk was averaging in a PPR league 17 points a game. And last year, because of his injury, he only averaged 12. But, I know a lot of people had thought that, the number 1 overall pick will be Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown went number 2 in our league. The year before, obviously, he averaged almost 24 points a game in 2016. Last year, he averaged 20.5 points a game. So, I mean, in my book, I was looking at that he averaged 23, Gronk averaged 17. I'm saying 17 points for a tight end those are wide receiver numbers. Low end wide receiver 1 numbers, kind of in that ballpark.
Makes sense, yep.
But all my wide receiving core from the year before were all guys on teams that used kind of a tandem wide receiver. Eric Decker and Brandon Marshall on the Jets. They're both like were wide receiver ones. Amari Cooper and Michael Crabtree again on the Raiders, both kind of like their wide receiver ones. So that was the strategy I was kind of looking towards, and I thought that if I was able to get two great tight ends and all those wide receivers of similar caliber to that, I would be able to put together a winning team. Unfortunately, was not the case. The strategy did not work out in my favor with Gronk getting injured, and then Jordan Reed getting concussed later in the season and being a non-factor in a Redskins team that had a lot of weapons. So
I do like the explanation. However, the problem is, I think they went wrong, is the other league, going off that one, a little bit different than this league.
definitely,
I think the scoring's a little bit different. I can't recall what I did for that one, but I know it's a little bit different. And certainly Gronk isn't a bad pick at all, no matter where it is, because we know what he can do.
yeah. Like I said, I mean, he's definitely a first-round talent, and maybe this league probably closer to a second-round talent, but he certainly is not. Probably would not have been on the board at 16th overall with the people in our league. I would have to imagine.
No.
Especially coming off of the year before. I mean, he was a monster in fantasy the year before, and he even missed a couple games, and he still was putting up impressive numbers, equal to the season that they won Super Bowl 49, and he played in every game. So, I think the moral of that kind of story was that I should have gone for a Julio or an Antonio Brown, or I mean, even a top tier quarterback with the number one overall pick, because I mean those guys are guaranteed over 20 points a game, and a top tier quarterback's guaranteed almost 40. So, I mean, a Drew Brees, a Matt Ryan, and Aaron Rodgers, or a Tom Brady.
We actually had, in the past, we've had quarterbacks go as high as 2 or 3. So it definitely wouldn't have been, like, shocking to see that happening. What would be more shocking, a quarterback go 1 or Gronk go 1? I can't tell you. Both seem kind of tough. It was a very rare situation.
Yeah.
And we even talked about it last week with Nico. We said that we kind of only found that there were 2 players that were very top at the time, with Antonio Brown and Julio.
Yeah.
That would be interesting to pick.
I mean, I think a lot of, especially with this league, there's 8 teams, there's a lot of scarcity. I mean, like I said, you talk about the top, tier of quarterbacks, and I mean, there's those guys who will get you 40 points a game, 35 at least. And I mean, I know a lot of the playoff teams managed to, they'd have a combination where they drafted someone high. I know Nico took Tom Brady and he used Kirk Cousins, who he picked up. And I mean, no one expected, I guess, Kirk Cousins to really go off the way he did. But I mean, that could get you 70 points a game in a week. There were some weeks where I don't even know if I scored 70 points. I mean, and those are, that's just from one position. And I think, especially with the wide receivers, as I learned last year, when I was trying to make a trade for Antonio Brown later in the season, was that you're just, if your wide receiving core is, middle of the pack guys or the second option on a team, you're not gonna be competitive come playoff time. You may not make the playoffs. I mean, at the time where I decided to attempt to trade for a top tier wide receiver, or even a quarterback, I had done the math out, and I was sitting in, I think, 3rd place at the time. And in the midway point in the season, I said, I am not going to make the playoffs, just because I can tell week to week that these guys are not going to get me there. Looking at all my competition schedules and, the people they were going up against, I just knew, I said, I'm not going to make the playoffs, and I didn't, so.
Pretty damn close. Only me and you both missed it by inches.
Yeah.
One common thing that all the champions have had is just that top 3 receiver. Beckham happened to be the case for this year. It's important. 3 receivers. 8 teams. I know it's not your standard 10, but do the math out.
Yeah.
You have 3 receivers, 8 teams. That's 24 receivers just for that spot.
Yep.
10 teams in a typical. Sometimes they have 3, but most of them, the standards have 2 receivers that play, if I'm correct. And that's only 20. You got to pick them early.
You do. I mean, there's like I said, there's definitely a level of scarcity. You know, you talk about Gronk, and there's Gronk, and there's everyone else. I mean, there's some out there like Jimmy Graham or Travis Kelsey who you'd put in that right below Gronk as far as receiving points that they tend to score, and then I would say running backs a lot of the same way. I mean, there's David Johnson, there's Le'Veon Bell, and it's a crapshoot. I mean, we can talk about I picked up DeMarco Murray. I did not think he was going to be good, and he was very good. But that's the thing with the running backs, and the running back position gets injured so frequently. But there's definitely, to get back to what you were saying, there's definitely, a level of scarcity. You said there's 24 wide receiver slots in the entire league. There's not 24 great wide receivers. There's, maybe 1 or 2 rounds worth, and that's it. And you have to fill those gaps with people who are good enough. And you really do have to be lucky to have a top tier, person in that skill set, I would believe, to have a winning team.
Absolutely. And even if the ones you pick, you per se pick the top 24, they're not going to be the top 24 through the season.
Exactly.
You're just in every single position. There's going to be
the DeAndre pick. I mean,
yep.
I mean, I had DeAndre the year before in that other league, and nobody thought that he was gonna. I think to some degree everyone thought Brock Osweiler was going to be a better quarterback than Ryan Mallett or Brian Hoyer were the year before, but just nothing happened, and certainly he was a first round talent. We logged into the fantasy sports page, and the first story up was, can DeAndre reclaim his fantasy standing in 2017? People who you expect to be studs don't turn out, and Todd Gurley's that pick number 6 overall, and Todd Gurley was on my board. I would have taken Todd Gurley, and so was DeAndre, and I think that's someone like Teach, who we all kind of laughed at for taking Ezekiel Elliott in the first round, because we're all thinking, even if he's good, there's so many other guys you could take in the first round, but he took Zeke, and it paid off. I mean,
that was a shocker.
That was a shocker that he not only took him in the first round, but he actually was a first-round talent. And while I think he could have waited and gotten him in a later round, I mean, it really paid off. So, it's a certain amount of, I think, knowing your players and doing your research. But in the end of the day, I think a lot of it's a crapshoot, and especially at injury-heavy positions. And, you just don't know what could happen week to week with players going off or not showing up, and you just don't know.
Oh, it's just unpredictable. I mean, I think you and Teach had the biggest shockers. Everything else seems standard. Yeah. Me and Nico were debating if Gurley was the first rounder at the time. I thought he was. Nico wasn't so sure about that.
I had him pegged as a second rounder on my board last year.
You did?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually probably would have worked for him around 6-7. Same thing with Josh. But yeah, that kind of, you set the tone certainly, Gronk. That kind of just pushed things back a little bit, and then Teach really set the bar with Elliott, and it kind of pushed, now you're like, okay, do I reach for someone? And it just, the second round just went crazy with quarterbacks.
Yeah.
And as we look, you actually had like we talked about before, you had the last pick in the second round, and you actually got Brandon Marshall. And let me just say beforehand, Brandon Marshall in a PPR league was basically God tier for a little bit. The guy could catch 100 balls, mid-teens, hundreds, 1,500 yards, and get you touchdowns.
Yep.
Love the pick. This was another case, unfortunately, where it was the Todd Gurley case. I'm going to start calling this the Todd Gurley case from now on, where you have a really good player, but you have nothing around him. We had this debate where Todd Gurley just had no supporting cast, and everyone knew he was going to run it.
Yep.
Brandon Marshall just had no quarterback.
And I think, to me, that was a surprise because,
Was it Fitzpatrick?
Fitzpatrick the year before just went off. And, he went off with pretty much the same supporting cast. And then I actually wasn't going to pick Brandon Marshall. I was actually going to pick Eric Decker. I had Decker on my team the year before, and what scared me was I believe he had a knee injury maybe in camp last year. So I decided to stay away and pick Marshall. I mean, there was another, again, that's an example of a team that had this like, two-headed dragon at wide receiver, and one of them was always open, and that was just the way that offense moved. And then Fitzmagic turned back into Fitztragic, and Eric Decker, blows out his knee in the middle of the season. I'm saying, all right, Brandon Marshall's gonna get all this, and he just never showed up. And I started him a lot of weeks because I thought it was a safe, I mean, towards the end of the season, I think we were looking at like 8 or 9 points a game. I mean, it was pathetic. He wasn't getting any touchdowns, but that was definitely a Todd Gurley thing, I think I would say. And I'm not quite sure what to expect from him this year because he's getting older. He's 33. He's on the Giants, which is a very receiver heavy team. His skill set seems to overlap to me with the younger Sterling Shepard, who was also on my board last year, who Josh had. But I don't know. That'll be an interesting thing this year, I think, to see where he goes. Certainly.
Well, Shepard could play the slot. That could create some. The Giants receivers are gonna be interesting. Gonna be looking forward to that.
The old diva wide receiver core.
Yeah, I was making a joke. They're not gonna make the playoffs because they're gonna keep getting unnecessary, like.
Yeah, between
roughness
that and all the Miami trips. And,
oh boy.
I mean, and then there's the other thing too. I mean, you want to talk about like quarterbacks who tend to put up a lot of numbers. Eli Manning in the past has been, a lot of the times recently their defense hasn't necessarily been the best, so they're throwing a lot to come from behind and try to close out games and win these games. And he's 37. You don't know when the decline's going to start for him either.
He's 37, huh?
I believe he's 37. Yeah, him and Phillip Rivers.
No kidding. I actually I knew he was getting up there. 37. That's something I got consider too. If I look at a Giants receiver.
Yep.
This year,
I
wow.
mean, you cut. Part of me wonders if that whole process of signing Marshall to the I think it was a 2-year deal that he signed. It's got to be like they're going all in to try and put enough weapons around this guy as he's nearing the end of his career to try and get back to a championship. But definitely something to that division is very competitive. It should be even more competitive this year than it was last year. The Cowboys, should be impressive. The Redskins, of course, have been decent year in and year out. And of course, the Eagles, Carson Wentz has now a year starting under his belt, and that could be an interesting thing too. A lot of these younger quarterbacks like Carson Wentz and even guys like Winston and Mariota, where are they going to necessarily be drafted this year? I think some of those guys have very high upside, especially with a lot of the this draft in free agency put a lot of weapons at their disposal too. I mean, you look at Deshaun Jackson now in Tampa Bay,
Right. Yep.
and Corey Davis drafted number 5 overall, going to
Tennessee.
I mean, I don't know. I think it'll be very interesting to see, especially that division. I think that might be the most competitive division in football this year.
The NFC East never fails to entertain somehow, either a good way or a bad way.
Yeah.
Brandon Marshall in the NFC East, if he was there last year, I certainly would have had a good year. I think the talent's still there.
Yep.
And that's why I actually didn't mind the pick at all in the second round.
Yeah.
The Jets just suck.
Yeah.
There's no other way to put around it. And let me tell you, I'll be honest with you, if you took Decker with second round, you would never hear the end of it.
Oh, I know.
You'd never hear the end of it.
Yeah.
I could hear Janko's voice right now. I could hear him saying, "What is Bryan doing?"
Yeah, if I took Gronk, Decker, and then my third round pick ended up being, I would have been the laughing stock of the league.
6 and 8 though.
Yeah.
Stayed in it.
Yeah.
I think this is a good time to get to the third pick. So at this time, we'll recap it. Rodgers was so 3 quarterbacks were taken in the second round, none in the first. We had Rodgers, Newton, Brady, 1, 2, and 3 in that order. Third round hits, you obviously have the first pick. You go with, I was a little surprised, once again, Andy Dalton. Thoughts on that one?
So, going into the year, I knew there was only a few quarterbacks I was going to target. Now, remember my strategy from the year before that I was kind of bringing over to this year was, the quarterback position is important. Get one guy who's reliable, and you can always find a guy in the first few weeks of free agency to plug in. That was kind of my strategy going in. So, I had Brady on my board going second round, which he did. But I didn't pick, again, that first overall pick is a killer because you don't pick again until the end of the second round. And I kind of knew in this league he wasn't going to last to my pick, and he didn't. He went 2 picks before me to Nico. But I was willing to pick Brady despite the suspension. Now, I was surprised that Cam Newton went as early as he did. And I personally, I was surprised because, and I did not have him on my board at all. I kind of felt like that Super Bowl year for the Panthers was a bit of an outlier year. That I think it's very similar to what the Jets had, in, the same season. When you play a certain caliber of teams one year, and you get a little better in the offseason, it's a lot better to go off against
Yeah.
teams of the similar caliber the next. It's how the NFL's built for parity. So, just as an aside, I kind of wonder if maybe that's something the Cowboys are going to face this year. The year before they were last in their division. Last year they went off because they weren't really facing stiff challengers. This year they won their division. They're going to be facing a lot of tough opponents. Be interesting to see kind of where those players might end up in the draft. But getting back to my quarterback pick, so I do have the numbers on this as well. Now, Andy Dalton, while not necessarily your, as you can see, the fantasy points per game, not necessarily a star, in his, he tends to average just about 20, 21 points a game, which, I mean, isn't awful. I mean,
No, we consider really like a pretty solid game 25. Like
yeah.
that's a very very solid game.
Now, in 2016, I had him on my team, and you can see he only played 13 games. He got injured.
Right. Yep.
And but he still managed to average over 20 points a game. So I was thinking, I kind of thought him getting injured was a bit of a fluke, and I said, I might, go with this guy again. Now, if you see the quarterbacks, now last year, obviously I was bit by that. He only averaged 17.7 points a game, which is not good. But if you see the quarterbacks that, went after me here in the third round, Andrew Luck and Big Ben, I kind of view Big Ben as fantasy poison because he's going to miss some games, and he's going to go off in some games, but he's gonna miss time.
He's never played a full season. I think we've discussed that in the past.
Never played a full season.
Right.
And
Right.
and again, another one, old, getting up there.
Almost retired.
He almost retired. Yeah, the Patriots almost put him out of his misery. But and Andrew Luck, who was picked after me with the second pick of the third round, I don't believe Andrew Luck is a top caliber quarterback, and to some degree, I think that has to do with the team that's been put around him. But I mean, the numbers suggest that he's been regressing as a passer since he started in the league. He's actually started off better than he's ended up. Even as more skilled players like T.Y. Hilton have been added into his offense that should theoretically make him better. His skills as a passer are not equal to the level that we should be expecting. So I was not going to pick Luck. I was not going to pick Big Ben. So I picked Andy Dalton as sort of a safe choice, and the next quarterback after that's not even picked till Blake Bortles. Sorry for that, but
Happens.
Again, another guy I think we always expect going in every year. This is gonna be his year. This is gonna be his year, and it just never is his year. But I probably wasn't going to take him. So I mean, if you look at the quarterbacks that went before and went after, I kind of thought Dalton would be a safe choice, but it just didn't end up panning out for me the way I expected.
Yeah, I mean the quarterbacks even after you.
I'm not, to be completely honest, I'm not quite sure what we were all thinking, because guys like Phillip Rivers were like still on the board, and guys that have always been put up good numbers, even if their teams are bad and they lose a lot of games. I feel like maybe we were, I don't know what we were all thinking, maybe we just caught up in the moment, but I mean, guys who are known as really, I mean, Matt Ryan, who granted, the Falcons had never been the team that they were, until last year. He's always put up decent numbers year in and year out. So I'm not quite sure we were all thinking going with some of these choices, but certainly after, I think, you could probably exchange Newton for Matt Ryan this year, and, Rodgers, Ryan, and Brady will probably all go in the second round or before this year. So
Definitely could. Yep. I think everyone just had different quarterback rankings.
Yep.
It really
And
seemed like
Breeze
it.
is nowhere to be seen here too. I mean, that was a guy,
Yeah, he was 5th or 6th round.
Yeah.
That I remember selecting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean Matt Ryan was my 3rd quarterback. Ended up being 1, but
Mm.
down the line. But it's funny because the Dalton pick seems like, wow, that's shocking. But then you look the 3 quarterbacks after him, not so
Yeah.
bad. It really is not so bad.
It's a reliable pick. That's what I was kind of looking for. Again, my strategy wasn't built necessarily to have the high scoring quarterback. I now realize that was probably a huge failure on my part to not have at least one very good quarterback, especially with the lack of talent I lacked I had at the receiver position. So
Yeah, I and this is perfectly fine for it was your first year, and this league is completely different.
yep,
You just went with a strategy that just built for a different league.
yep,
It's built for another year, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, first year. I mean, I don't even remember if anyone. No one's ever won it their first year in the league. Me and Nico, fuck our first year was playing fantasy football. We didn't do that well.
yeah,
I'm, and that was your first year, right? That 2015 year.
yeah. I won it all that year.
Go figure.
Yeah. Those the winning strategy that year did not carry over to the next year.
That's yep. Question. Actually, going back to Gronk because I just forgot I didn't ask this. Did you consider anyone else at 1? If you can recall.
Well, I know that. I mean, maybe Antonio Brown just because he was the highest ranked player. I mean, a lot of the mock drafts I had too had Gronk going, and these are non-New England, players. The mock drafts that I did, he was always gone 6, 7, or 8 in the first round, which I guess is a little odd because of where we had him ranked. In our, players in our league had him ranked, I think, lower than that. But no, I didn't really consider taking anyone else other than Gronk. I kind of knew it was going to be Gronk. I think Josh. I mean, I'd been saying it for months, but I think Josh thought I was trying to fake him out by saying, "Oh, I'm taking Gronk." But no, I was serious. I was taking Gronk.
It became a badly kept secret by a couple of days before the draft. I
Yep.
recall. I think almost everyone knew.
Yeah.
That was like okay.
Yeah.
Gronk's going 1. Everyone was just that had everyone like reshuffling.
Yeah, and I think
what they had to
it
do.
was definitely very surprising for a lot of people that I didn't expect that I actually went through with it. And I was like, yeah, this is my strategy. But
Yeah, we almost didn't believe it. We
Yeah.
were like, well, we know Bryan wants to go off the Gronk, but like we want to see the pick first, and then it happened. Everyone's like, well,
Yep.
draft's on.
Yeah, well, I mean, to some degree, I mean, I guess I was probably trying to fake everyone out a little bit, at least in how I was, describing it. But yeah, no. I
You-
always intended on taking him.
You ever consider trading down? I know it was a new concept. Were you willing to toy with it, or you just wanted to play it safe throughout the whole draft?
I, in hindsight, I would have traded down because as much as I loved that number 1 overall pick, the waiting for so long, and then you get to pick back to back, which was good if your strategy is good and there's good players and you have good evaluations on those players. I did not. So when I would pick back to back, I was kind of just wasting a lot of my opportunities. I mean, it was like throwing stuff at a wall and seeing what sticks. Because you're just sitting there and you've got your board of who you want and you've got your strategy laid out there. And then you pick one and then you watch everyone else on that board get taken. And you have to wait. It's excruciating. And I would have traded down had I known then what I know now. I'm very happy to be picking where I'm picking this year.
Would you have 7th?
I 6th or 7th, I believe.
You actually dropped one in the
Yeah.
lottery that you caused a couple of teams to go up.
I did.
No. You were actually 5th.
Yeah.
You were 5th.
Yep.
That's right. Wait. No. 4th because you were 6th. Yep.
That's right, yep.
That's sorry. I did the reverse. You were 4th best odds to get the first pick, but then you dropped to 7th.
Yeah.
And you caused Teach, Jenko, and Nico all to bump up a spot.
You're welcome, guys.
Some may be happy about that. Some others.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I know. I've heard rumblings. Horizontal's been keeping me updated.
That's right. But you're actually on the other side of this now, and I think we'll get into that after. But yeah, a lot of people don't like 1, and back when I used to play like another league too, besides this one, I actually loved the first pick. the first two. I was like, you know what? I'm getting the absolute stud. I like as if there's anything I can guarantee, it can carry to this guy.
Yeah.
But what I've come to notice is that the more teams is actually the more roster spots you have.
Yeah.
So if you have two quarterbacks, three receivers playing, the lower the pick you want to start.
Yeah.
Because like you said, wait and go that time. You got to fill those spots.
Yeah.
When you have more players on your team, one player theoretically is less likely to carry your team.
Yeah.
Except Payne Man in 2013.
Yeah.
Which actually won one person that's championship.
Yeah.
But theoretically, you need a core
Yeah.
of not just one. Whereas a standard league where you have one quarterback and two receivers, if that player is that good, it's gonna win you the weeks.
Yeah.
This a stud at one will certainly help, but it's not gonna win you the championship.
Yeah.
You just need more positions out
Yep.
there.
And that's why I kind of like picking seventh this year because, you've got that pick. You only have to wait. 6 people are picking before you, then you. And I mean, if we're looking at this, year, I mean, the people who went, after 6 that I think would be of note this year. We've got, Rodgers and Brady. David Johnson goes very late. Zeke, Dez doesn't.
Yep.
Jordy Nelson going in the 3rd round. I mean, Devontae Freeman, Mike Evans. I mean, these are all guys who are, borderline, if not, all first round talent. Just our rounds aren't big enough to accommodate them all. And those guys all went after that 7th pick. So I kind of like having that 7th pick. You wait 2, and then you get another. And I think that's a good way to build a team. It's certainly something I'm considering going with my strategy this year.
And especially if you hit it twice,
Yep.
you get 2 studs. It's least likely if you're at 1, you get 2 studs. You get 1 most likely.
Yeah.
The best odds too. But that other one's always in question,
Yeah.
especially if it's a guy that had a breakout season, may not necessarily get to that point again.
Yeah.
Allen Robinson's a good example of that.
Yeah.
I mean, he went a little bit higher in round 2. But it's guys like that haven't proven themselves so long. You're like, oh, this guy's on his way up. But for whatever reason it is,
Yep.
it just does not work out.
I had Robinson on my board as well, going into the season, and I think we all evaluated Jacksonville to be a lot better than they
Oh
were.
my God, I had him a playoff team.
Yeah, I had them winning their division as well. I believe who's the other Jaguars receiver? They were kind of trying to attempt that like 2-headed dragon kind of thing with.
Oh, it was the Allens, Allen Hearns,
Yep,
and then they had
that's right,
Marquise
Hearns.
Lee as a slot.
I believe I had Hearns at some point in the year. I'm not sure if I drafted him. I think I may have on one of the mid rounds. If not, I probably got him off waivers at some point. But I know I did have him, and I think some of those teams are frustrating because you just know, like the Jets, they have potential, and they just never get you there, and you're sitting there yelling at your TV on a Sunday because these guys aren't, coming through, and then you got to watch the mediocre Thursday night games because you're rooting for that one guy who's, you're trying to, got to come through, and they never do, and I don't know. Definitely something to keep in mind when drafting this year.
Absolutely. And your team is a great example of what to do if you don't draft well. It might not be everyone's strategy, but it got you 6 wins.
Yeah.
Let's recall that you had 59 transactions. From the top of my head, I can remember that. The second team was myself, 27, and I think Nico had 24, and then so on, and then I think the lowest got around 10 or something.
Yeah.
That area. So, that being said, you had a crap ton more moves than everyone else. I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah.
I would love to hear the process of this.
So, what I try to do is, I treat my bench like an NFL team would treat its practice squad. There's a lot of practice squad wheelings and dealings that occur in the NFL where some guy will get signed to another team, they'll just get dropped, and like some other guy, it's just all based on potential. So after I've got that core in the first couple weeks of the season of guys that you're going to go to fill in your starter positions, a lot of the times the guys like Allen Robinson or things like that who you may have thought are going to be starters and they're just not turning out. And rather than hold these guys on the bench and wait for them to come alive, I'll pick up that guy who, had an amazing week. I know Jordan Howard was one of those guys. I think I had him on my team at 2 separate times. Nico had him. He bounced around a lot.
Definitely.
A guy who's filling in for someone else who's injured and just starts going off. And I'd rather have that on my bench as insurance, for one of my starters, or maybe to keep him off of someone else's team who I might be playing against. And, a lot of these guys are one and dones, but that's just the nature of the game, I think, to some degree. Some guys put up like big numbers one week and, not as much the next week. But that's kind of how I treat my bench. I treat it like, to just keep churning that, trying to find that stud. And at the end of the day, the guys I'm dumping, for the most part, aren't really getting picked up by other teams. A lot of the guys just kind of sat in free agency. They were just guys that maybe we drafted and didn't really turn out, or maybe guys that got hurt, or, there's, I think, a caliber of player that we draft that is just never shows up. And I know some people like to hold on to them thinking that, oh, they're finally going to get good this week. They're playing a good opponent. They've got it together. And we keep them on our team. Stephon Diggs was one of those guys for me. Kelvin Benjamin was one of those guys for me. But I'd rather sign these guys or pick these guys up that I think have more potential of being something big. And to that degree, I'm watching the scores. I'll be at McShaw's watching the Patriots game, and I have my fantasy app open. I'm watching these scores like a hawk, trying to find who's going off today, who's worth putting a claim on. That's kind of part of my free agency strategy. That's why I have so many pickups.
I absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
and I still can't believe 59 moves.
59 moves.
14 weeks, 59 moves. That's a good amount.
Yeah.
And you do mention that a lot of players don't get picked up, back up, maybe because it's just good for a week or two. One player that did get picked up and that created a little bit of buzz in the league was Martellus Bennett that you dropped, because we know you had Reed and Gronk. So you just had a boatload of tight ends. I know this is your first year in the league. Your thought? Do you recall when you dropped them? What was going on your team at the time?
I do. So, I think to some degree I dropped Bennett very near to the trade deadline. It was the back half of the season. We're getting to that point, and I had done the math, and I knew that I wasn't going to probably make the playoffs unless I made some moves. So I was trying to find as many players with upside that were free agents that I could put on my bench and maybe put in my roster. At this point in the season, I had abandoned my core 2 tight end base to have Gronk as a tight end and Reed as my flex, because at this point in the season, Gronk's been hurt. He's out. So I've kind of bumped up Reed to that tight end position. Now, you might ordinarily think, all right, well, that means you could, keep Reed at the flex and move Bennett into your tight end spot. But Bennett was putting up average numbers. I've got the stats here. Last season, he put up 10.5 points per game on average. And the year before, he put up 10.4. These aren't... He was averaging 3 receptions a game for 44 yards. I mean, these are pedestrian tight end numbers. And I know the name, being that number 1 tight end on the Patriots, a team that uses its tight ends a lot, I mean, those numbers just don't... I was very surprised that my decision to drop him was taken as seriously as it was in this. People saying that Jenko was saying, I would have traded you for him. I didn't view him as a tradable talent because his numbers were just rather pedestrian. Most weeks he wasn't cracking 8 or 9 points. And I think to some degree that's because I think he could be in that top tight end tier with Kelsey and Graham, maybe especially this year with Green Bay. But he was hurt last year as well. He had ankle problems, and the Patriots really after Gronk got hurt, they ditched the 2 tight end base and they really went to the 5 receiver base. They picked up Michael Floyd, and Malcolm Mitchell came into his own, and Hogan came into his own. And there weren't enough targets to go around for Bennett. And, I mean, I get a little leery at, I think we all do, at starting Patriots players just because of, how they game plan for their opponents and how many weapons, especially this year, they have. And I think to some degree, like I remember talking to Nico about it at some point in the season. He picked up he had Edelman on his team, and Edelman hadn't had a touchdown for the first 8 or 9 weeks of the season, and he's one of the top, receivers in the league as far as value. I mean, he's Brady's go-to guy, but here he is without a touchdown. That's just the way the Patriots are. So I didn't view Bennett as the kind of player who would have any value, and I was shocked when not only did Jenko pick him up, he picked him up, and I think I was with Nico at the time. Actually, I think we were in the URI bookstore, and he looked at me like, "You dropped Bennett?" And I was like, "Yeah, I dropped Bennett. He's got no value to me. And I can't believe you dropped Bennett. You let Jenko get Bennett?" But I didn't see that as I think the numbers pretty much back me up. Most of the tight ends that were free agents, who I had to go to, dig up in that dump of weeks like 13 and 14, like free agents, once Reed was concussed. I mean, most of those guys were averaging the same numbers as Bennett, who I dropped, like your Jack Doyles, and those guys were kind of averaging like 9-10 points, which is about what I was getting with Bennett. So I know he's a big name, but I just didn't see the hype. I didn't see the where the value was.
You got to sell high.
Yeah.
That's the key. Depth is rare, but when you have it, you got to take advantage of it.
Yeah.
When dropping a guy that's borderline should be on the team or not, the best thing to do is always look at the other team's rosters, I would say. Because Janko certainly had a hole at tight end. That was maybe his only hole on his team at the time. And if Janko knows he's one piece away, or any other team knows he's one piece away, they're willing to give a little bit more for that.
Yeah.
You don't even have to... It's not like it's like, oh, okay, fifth for Bennett. You can either fill a hole you have in need, maybe another like a slot receiver that you like to fit your team around. You can even say, if I really have no other players that I'm going to get for this, ask for a pick.
And in hindsight, I probably would have asked for a pick or probably not a player, because at that point I knew my season was pretty much done. That I knew that even if I made the playoffs, I was going to be most likely one and done. There was no chance that I was going to go up against Jenko or Teach or Igo and come away. But I don't know. I just feel like I know Josh wanted to trade with me all year. He's begging for Stephon Diggs.
Loves trades.
Begging. And we had several different offers at different times. Again, he was one of those players who I didn't want to drop because I was like, oh, this guy's going to be good. He's going to be good. But a lot of the trades that Josh and I were throwing back and forth were we'd swap for... I'd give him Stephon Diggs and like a fifth, and Josh would give me someone in like a fourth or something like that. And I just felt very uncomfortable dealing out future picks, even though I would be getting something theoretically better in return. I guess I like the idea of adding future picks, but I don't like trading them away because I feel like if I messed up this year, I don't want to be paying for that next year. I don't want my draft capital next year to suffer because of mistakes that I made this year. I'd rather just wrap that up and keep it together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I actually traded a fourth for a Gurley and got a sixth back, so I'm down 2 spots. It only recommend if you think your team can win it all.
Yeah.
And I thought running back 2 I could fit with Gurley. I'm like, oh, this guy's gonna go off.
Yeah.
Didn't happen, but I actually don't regret that pick.
Yeah.
Definitely. This is definitely something new for you.
Yeah.
So, I actually think your team, you can learn the most out of anyone this year. I think you can definitely take some... You had some good examples. I actually learned a couple stuff from your team as well that I noticed. The way you picked up players like you said, interchangeable guys from week 1 to 2, not a permanent solution.
Mm-hmm.
I actually do like that.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, I'll give you credit. You had a board
Mm-hmm.
for your draft, and you stuck with it.
Yeah.
You certainly stuck with it. You had Gronk 1,
Mm-hmm.
Dalton you thought was a safe quarterback
Mm-hmm.
that's going to go off. And you had a plan, you went with it. I mean, can't hate. I mean,
Yeah.
that could easily work
Mm-hmm.
1 year. And, I mean, completely different each year.
Yeah. And I think somewhat on the trading picks thing, this is going to be a little like at Josh right now, but at Mr. Bombser, but how did we let him get all these picks in like the top 30 picks? This he's accumulated so much draft capital. I think the pressure is going to be on to make as many of those picks stick as possible, because that's a lot of serious potential to have a lot of high caliber players.
6 in the top 33, if I can recall.
That's what I thought it was.
It should be interesting. We talked
Yeah.
about it. He's excited for it. He
Mm-hmm.
loves having the first overall pick.
Yep.
And in this case, I could see why if he can bundle those picks together.
Mm-hmm.
Though he has mentioned concerns about waiting so long to get to 16.
Yeah.
What if he has something up his sleeve?
Yeah.
But maybe I'll ask him down the line.
I know Nico and I talked about potentially trading. Nico's, I believe, picking
Fourth. I have the
Fourth?
third pick. He has the fourth.
fourth for my seventh. And it was something I was thinking of. I said, "Oh, well, I'll trade you my seventh overall pick for your third overall pick, but I don't want to do the whole draft at 3. I want to do the whole draft at 7." And it ended up being a non-starter for him. But I think you want to get that high first round talent, but your draft position might sink you as you get into the later rounds, mid rounds, not later. But your 4, 5, and 6, where some of us did very well.
Yep.
Just looking at the past there.
I'll tell you what, trades they're not going to happen the first 2 rounds, I would say, because people have ideas what they want.
Yep.
Third is still borderline. I
Mm-hmm.
think fourth is when the trade, the draft really starts. I think
Yeah.
I could say a second draft really starts around 4, because you have really the elite talent off.
Yep.
Or guys who were elite talents or still could be, like those third round guys in that area. Fourth round is really where you make your money there.
Yeah.
And live draft this year, we're hoping at least. Maynard Cranston, we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if the more time we have, the more that everyone's there, I wonder if picks are going to be moved. And do you feel comfortable trading picks during the draft?
Yeah, I think I would do it.
If the right player came along.
Yeah, I think so. And a lot of that to me would be because if there was someone I wanted, I might be willing to part with a later pick. Or if there was someone else wanted, I will take those 7th or 8th round picks all day long. I mean, one thing we haven't really talked about yet is what I did with my running backs last year. I mean, I took DeMarco Murray in the 7th round, which I think we can all say is an outlier this year. He will not last until round 7. Which was against my own strategy. That I had, my strategy was, it's PPR league. I'm basing my team off my tight end, my flex, and my wide receivers. For my running backs, I want pass catchers. I want guys out of the backfield. And I drafted Danny Woodhead, rip in peace. And I believe I took Sproles with a late round pick. But Murray was available, and that was an impulse buy by me. And, I mean, that really worked out. He averaged so many points a game. And I ended up picking up, later as the season went on, LeGarrette Blount. And monster year, but he sat on my bench almost every week because I was too afraid to start him. Because every week I was saying, all right, this is the Patriots. This is the week. It's going to be James White's week or Deion Lewis's week. And I just didn't have the guts to start Blount because... I mean, you look at the Super Bowl. Blount had like 3 carries, in the most important game of the season.
Right.
The guy who had 18 touchdowns in the regular season played like 3 snaps. So, you just don't know week to week, and that scared me a lot. But that's what I'm saying. To get back to your trade point, I would be definitely willing to maybe move down a couple spots and gain like a 7th or 8th round pick, because I think you can do some damage in those rounds.
Are you All right, so let me rephrase this. Nick and Alex are new members in this league.
Mm-hmm.
How willing are you to trade with them, knowing, like, I've been observing your style, and you like this, try something first, like, maybe be a little conservative, but then, like, you see the results, and then you adjust.
Yeah.
You haven't seen these guys yet. You know how everyone else operates a little bit. You have a good idea.
Yeah.
Willing to trade with them as much? Or a little bit different, it would hold off a little bit.
I'd be willing to trade with, I think, just about anybody, for the right price, and that includes them. I do think they might. There's definitely a learning curve to Judas's league, and we've talked about that. Even, guys like Josh, me, and Teach, who came into the league last year, never played in Judas's league before. All to varying degrees into sports, but a lot of us didn't have a lot of fantasy football experience.
Nope.
Alex and Nick do. Alex and Nick have a lot of fantasy football experience. So they're going to be, I think, smarter than we were coming in, but it's definitely a learning curve, and it's in the draft, it whacks you. When you're in that, we were upstairs last year, and I mean, my keyboard was covered in sweat. Like I was like trembling. Like, I think impulse decisions do get made in the draft, and that's something they definitely have to look at. You have to keep a cool head when you're in this league, and especially on draft night. But
I can't wait for it. It's gonna be interesting. I think we talked about previous podcasts that the league's gonna be balanced.
yes, I think this is the most balanced league, and we talk about parity in the NFL. I mean, I think this is the most balanced league you could possibly get. Everybody in here is up on everything going on in football.
Right.
And nobody is going to be that guy and not set their lineup. Nobody is going to, fall off the face of the planet and not respond to trade requests for Antonio Brown for 4 weeks when he's sitting on his bench. That's not going to happen at Nate. That's not going to happen this year. So I don't know. I think I'm very excited for the competition. I know. I think in Nico's podcast talked about what will the average position be. I do think we may see a more like close to 500 league. It would not surprise me to see 7-7 teams. I mean, consider that there was three of us had 6-8 records, and we weren't bad teams by your standard measure of what a bad team is, but we all had losing records. And I mean, that was basically the threshold to get into the playoffs. So,
yeah, last year was kind of balanced, but it was a little weird at the same time. We had 2-11-3 teams.
yeah.
And Josh was the outlier, 3-11.
Mm-hmm.
This year, what record makes the playoffs exactly? Do you see the 7-7? Do you see the 6-8? Do you see something different? We've had 8-5 not make the playoffs before.
I think a 7-7 team has a good chance of making the playoffs. And I think the most wins that any team is going to get, I'm going to say, is 10.
10? That's a good number.
I'm going to cap it at 10. 10 wins, and most likely, probably, maybe even 9. Just because I think, last year was, a slate, wiping the slate clean, 4 new players in the league. We get 2 new this year, but like I said, they're smarter than the 4 of us were coming in. So, I think we all have different styles. We definitely all have different grades on players. We have different strategies. But at the end of the day, I think more talent is going to be taken early in this draft than the last draft. And I think that's going to reflect on the teams. I think there's going to be less of those guys who are slipping to the 7th and 8th rounds this year than there were last year.
Yeah, the 7th round last year was certainly a gold mine that I'm going through. I'll just name a couple guys. Murray went 7th round, Greg Olsen went 7th round, Cooks went 7th round, Doug Baldwin went 7th round, Kelsey went 7th round, T.Y. Hilton went 7th, Fitzgerald went 7th, and Mack went 7th.
That's a nasty round.
I can't believe that, just looking at it again. I've seen it before, but oh my god.
Yeah.
All 8 of those were hits.
Yeah.
All 8 of those
Every
hits.
single one. If you had a team with all those players on it, you would have
a good chance of winning.
probably won it all.
You had a good chance of winning. And it's amazing. You just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's more of a sure thing, like you said, that's going to happen this year.
Yep.
Bold prediction for this year. It could be anything. We usually do about other team.
Yeah.
But you have a bold prediction for someone? out there?
Um, I'm going to say that half of Josh's picks in the first 33 are busts.
Wow. We've had our second Josh bold prediction
Yeah.
here. We had Josh going 7-7. Nico's. We have so you would say 3 of the 6 are not going to turn out.
Yep. Um,
How would that affect his team? You think he's going to be okay? Because Josh has been like the 76ers in
yep.
this league.
Yep.
Everyone's been
Trust in the
talking about
process.
how his team's going to be.
No, I'll tell you, I actually don't think it will affect his team if he has that many busts. Because if you look at a lot of our teams through 3 rounds, we had a lot of holes. Granted, he has more opportunities to strike than we did, but I mean, there's it's very easy if you know move that through the free agency and if Josh is a wheeler and dealer. He'll find the talent to put his team over the top. I do think Nico is correct. I think Josh moves to a 7-7 team. But like I told you, I think 7-7 is good enough to make the playoffs. I think most of the teams are going to be 7-7 teams. So there's a good chance that might not be that's not a bad thing.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
Wow, Josh is a hot topic this
Yeah.
this, this summer. Give him that.
Mm-hmm.
I should ask him a bold prediction for himself. I didn't think of it. So you have 7th pick, and I know you said you're excited about it.
Mm-hmm.
You ever think about the people drafting around you
I
this
do.
year? Because you have Alex behind you,
Yep.
and you have Teach in
I
front of
believe
you.
I
You
believe
do.
Teach. Yeah. Um, it's you know, I know the kind of players that Teach is going to go for. So or at least I think I do. So I think I can make my decisions around that. Alex is a bit of a wild card, but he's so knowledgeable with sports. I mean, I can take an educated guess, on the guys I think he'll probably take, but it's definitely an interesting. I would not want to be in the middle of a you and Nico sandwich. I feel like that'd be a very bad place to be drafting because after seeing this past year and we've looked at some of your previous drafts, like I know how you guys draft now, and
It's something.
it's something.
It's actually me, Nico, and Jenko in a row.
I
Nico's in a me and
I'd
Jenko
feel like
sandwich.
if I was in the middle of that, there'd be a lot of Nico saying rats like all the time, getting very angry at like players that I'd be taking in the middle. But I will say one other thing that I was not expecting until we were all in the draft room last year was the amount of like like hostilities. I know you talk about like revenge picks. The amount of hostility that like a lot of us had in that room when someone was taking someone that we wanted. There was a lot of calling people out. Are you kidding me? That was my guy.
Oh, it's gonna get worse this year. I'll tell you what. If we have the
With a
live draft,
oh, definitely.
things will get slowed down, and people might lose their patience.
Yeah,
We'll see.
yeah.
I can't wait.
I remember one pick in particular, my late round pick of Jimmy Garoppolo to get me through the first 4 games of the season. Did not go over well with Mr. Choi, who picked Tom Brady, and was probably relying on that last round pick of Jimmy Garoppolo to get
Absolutely.
him through the first round. It ended up, backfiring on me because Jimmy Garoppolo got injured in the second game of the season, but did not finish those first 4 and sort of left me scrambling for a quarterback earlier than I anticipated to be plugging someone else in. But it's I don't know. It's one of those things that the draft room is always a little feisty. So
Yeah, yeah. I can't wait for it. I'm expecting good things from you this year.
yeah,
I think. I actually think you're gonna make my bold prediction for you is I think you're gonna mix it up. I could definitely see you create like going with the same strategy but like different players. I think you're gonna adjust from last year, and I think your draft is gonna be better than your free agency. It's gonna be an
yeah.
inverse for this year. I think that's what's gonna happen. I'm interested to see.
I'm not going to give any information on the players that I'm targeting, but what I will say is prepare for an interesting draft. I do have a strategy going in again. It's a bit unorthodox, but the way I'm grading my players going into the year, Mr. Bomser kind of inspired me. I saw he put together his is Excel sheet. I don't quite have an Excel sheet, but I do have a list of the players that I've ranked and who I want and who's going to be the fits on this team for each position. And it could be an unorthodox draft. I'm excited to see people's reactions to my draft.
Can't wait.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we can go into the last segment of the podcast
Mm-hmm.
where we just talk about what's going on in the sports world. And you happen to pick a slow week
Yeah.
to come on the show.
Mm.
We talked about NBA free agency with Josh.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the draft, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
MLB stats with Nico. I know you're not too big on the NBA. You follow a little
Mm-hmm.
bit. So I'm going to change my direction to, actually, do you have anything you want to talk about in particular?
Well, I mean, there's two sports that I follow religiously. I follow from September to March, it's football. And from March to September, it's IndyCar. And then in the middle of that, you've got the things that I follow to like a lesser degree. I mean, I catch the Red Sox almost every game, at least part of the game. I'm less aware of the league at large.
MLB itself, yep.
But I mean, I know the Red Sox very well. I know a lot of the stats and I know all the players and everything. And the Celtics have been the most recent because I didn't really watch a lot of the Celtics until I lived with Pat this year. Pat watched the Celtics every night. When I was living with Josh the other years, I knew a lot about the Spurs. We watched the Spurs frequently. But obviously I'm a Celtics fan and have been keeping up with the free agency moves and so forth. But
This is what I'm going to do.
Mm-hmm.
You did say football won.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do the same thing I did with Nico last year. Last podcast. I'm going to give you 3 teams. I want you to say contender or pretender.
Okay.
The first one, I have Buccaneers.
Contender.
Want to follow up on it?
Yeah, I think in that division, I think you've got 4 good teams. I highly doubt that the Falcons will be as good next year as they were this year. That doesn't mean they're going to be bad, but I think they could be in for they're definitely out of a hangover after a loss like that, an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object. I don't think. I mean, I kind of put them in that realm of like the Packers last year, where they had some real bad losses, but they were also pretty unstoppable at times too. But as far as the Buccaneers go, they're a team on the rise, and I think that division is open for the taking. The Saints are going to be passing on every down to try and win. And the Panthers, I think the Panthers are going to be interesting to watch. I think they're trying out some bold moves. They've got McCaffrey, which is an interesting choice for a team whose running game is based primarily around their quarterback. I mean, it's the Cam Newton show. McCaffrey is a very New England pick. It's not just because he's white, but I mean, it's his style of run, his style of play is not what you expect from a team.
All purpose.
Yeah, I mean, the Panthers team, they're all all their receivers and their quarterback are over 6'3" and 240. They're all tight end size, and you just don't really expect some short jittery kind of running back. But I think they're going to adapt their style of play this year. I think they're going to be an interesting team to watch, but I don't think they're going to be playoff good. In a division as crowded as that, Jameis Winston's coming into his own. The best deep threat in the league, Deshaun, Sean Jackson joined their team.
Mike Evans is also a deep threat you don't want to forget about.
Is on fire. First round talent right there.
I was just about to ask you. Okay, I just want to make sure.
Yep.
Okay.
And in my opinion, the third best receiver in the draft. I have him behind Jones and Brown. And I have him ahead of Beckham just because simply I think Beckham will get you the points, but on that team, I think there's going to be more to go around, whereas I think Evans will get his targets every week.
Yep.
He's a receiver that is a natural talent, someone that Winston feels comfortable throwing to, and Winston's a guy who's just getting better and better.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I have
It'll be
them.
good.
I think they're
I
definitely
agree.
going to be a contender this year, next year.
Cardinals had two rocky like they on like Mound and Valley. We could definitely say.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to put them in the middle. I'm not quite sure. I know they're not a contender, but I don't think they're a pretender. Last year was a bad year. Carson Palmer's definitely into his decline as a quarterback. Another team that was definitely had a hangover from a stellar year the year before. And but they lost Michael Floyd at a traffic stop, and they picked up. I believe they drafted a receiver as well. Larry's coming back. I think they have a good chance to win more games this year. Also, that division is very easy to win.
That's true. You got the Rams,
The Rams, the
Niners,
Niners,
and Seahawks are dependent.
the Seahawks. The Seahawks are good for 10 wins at least. Another thing to take into consideration with the Seahawks in that division is that the Legion of Boom is getting older. A lot of them are going to be 30 or 29 in this upcoming season. Definitely not. I mean, they're on the latter side of their prime, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah.
So I'm saying that they might be a little more vulnerable this season. I mean, they're a team who they always have. The Seahawks always seem to have a slow start before they really get it together as the season goes on. And if the Cardinals could take advantage of that and win early, I mean, no one was expecting the Cardinals to be as bad last year as they ended up being. But they certainly have the talent to be a contender.
Yeah, I think their defense can help too with Golden, Chandler Jones, Matthew,
Oh, yeah.
Pearson. So they have a good core there.
Yep.
I'll give you one last team. Kansas City Chiefs.
To me, I think a lot of people would agree. The thing that separates Kansas City from being a contender is Alex Smith. Now, Alex Smith is a guy. He reminds me a lot of early career Tom Brady, the Tom Brady of the beginning of the dynasty, where he was dependable. He didn't make mistakes. He had a good cast around him that he could get the ball off to. He wasn't asked to be super heroic. And he's a good quarterback, and if you have a great team around him, you're going to win a lot of games. And I think that the Chiefs drafting a quarterback very high this year was an interesting move because it kind of puts
Very weird.
it puts
And they fired the GM too. With a weird
Yes.
offseason for the Chiefs.
Um,
and released Macklin.
it puts them in a very odd kind of position where they've got like a ticking clock on Smith now. And unlike the Patriots of that dynasty, the early dynasty, I don't think they have the Chiefs have the talent around them, especially with the release of Macklin, to
And Charles.
and Charles to contend. And certainly firing your GM,
Says something.
says something about that.
Yeah.
I think they might be in a bit of a mini rebuild this year.
I agree. That's exactly what I was going to say.
I think they maybe are interested in trading Smith if their quarterback prospect kind of turns out. But I guess in a way there's another thing keeping them from being contenders, and that's Andy Reid.
I think he's good, but I guess to a point, a little Schottenheimer in him.
It's not that he's a bad coach. Coached against the Patriots and Super Bowl against the Eagles. It's just I don't think I think he has a limit. He has a cap.
A lot of people would say that too. Mixed feelings about him.
He's not bad, but I know, like, not to get overly patriot, but Belichick has a quote that I use a lot of time when we talk about John Farrell as a manager and stuff, and Belichick always says, "Players win games, coaches lose them." And I think to some degree that might be the Andy Reid problem, is that maybe his coaching decisions tend to, not that he's a risk taker, but he plays it very conservative, and that's why him and Alex Smith are such an interesting pair, because both of them are very conservative in how they play the game. And maybe there's just not enough, I hate to say the word pizzazz, but maybe that's it. Maybe there's just not enough risk taking in that offense, and
They got Ty Hill,
Yep.
which is actually going to be a good fantasy pick down the line.
Yep.
Maybe we'll talk on the podcast closer to the draft. So he's going to be an interesting pick.
Definitely.
The core of the defense is old except Marcus Peters because Taba Ali, Derek Johnson, Justin Houston, just another year older.
Yep.
I actually think they're going to be pretenders.
I mean,
we'll see.
Not to say that the AFC is particularly stacked. If anything, I think the NFC is stacked and the AFC is lacking in talent. It's possible the Chiefs could sneak in there, but the most stacked division in the AFC is the Chiefs division as far as having the Raiders, the Broncos, who are historically a good team. They did not make the playoffs last year, but I mean, I expect that they're going to rebound and contend for the playoffs. And then the Chargers and the Chiefs. All of those teams are not amazing teams, but they're all competitive with each other to some degree that I feel like, I mean, the Raiders are definitely head and shoulders above the rest of them, but I mean, it's not like the AFC East where there's a great team and three mediocre teams.
Right.
They're all decent to good, and they could all, any given Sunday, could beat one another. So it's possible the Chiefs could slide in there as a wild card spot, but I don't think they could go all the way.
It's good talking some NFL.
Yeah.
It's been a while because with NBA and every other sport going on.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing about the NFL season is that, I mean, it's all NFL all the time until it's not, and this is definitely the slowest part in the year for the NFL. Well, training camp starts 3 weeks from yesterday.
Yep.
So
it's going to be slow till the start, and I cannot wait for our fantasy football season. Bryan, I thank you so much for coming on. Very interesting podcast. You're definitely going to be my team to watch this year. I'm looking forward to what you see.
Appreciate that.
Everyone else viewing, you can follow this podcast on _the_horizontal on Twitter. Next podcast is going to be the likes of either Dan Janko or Nick Salvatore. I'm going to see scheduling what's going to happen, but stay posted. Should be one next week. This is Mike Judici signing off.